All right, welcome back to Inside Marc.
Inside Marc's brain.
Inside Marc's brain. We'll come up with a name for this segment as we go. And maybe this is where we get our listeners involved and they send us some suggestions.
Yeah. See, I'm thinking it's more like a couple of freewheeling dudes talking about drums.
All right, we're just talking about drums. So we're going to do this segment, we're going to talk about how to practice. We touched on it last time. We gave you some homework on how to work on feel. And it was a lot to it. I mean, I feel like we could go into that a little bit more. But let's talk about just practice in general.
Yeah.
Let's talk about retrieval for a second. What does that mean?
Retrieval is your ability to practice something, and then when you're performing, that it's still there.
Okay.
For example, I had a student one time, and it's at the university, so he came back in September, and I said, "What have you been working on during the summer? What have you been practicing?" And he said, "I've been, working on the Garibaldi book." I said, "One of my favorite books." I said, "Let me hear you play a little." And he said, "Do you have the book?" I said, I do have the book." I said, "But what did you learn?" So I could play any of those patterns. I said, "Play one for me." So can you give me? I said, "No." Tell me, what are the concepts?
I feel like I was your student sometimes. Because I have to have it in front of me. I can't.
Yeah.
I haven't been able to.
But when we're playing,
this.
right, we either have nothing in front of us, or we have, chart. Sorry, but most arrangers don't write the best drum parts, so we have a map that's not really helping us. But what we mostly have is our ears and our memory.
Yep.
Neural memory, oral memory, of what we should be playing. So I said to the student, "Well, tell me the concepts, the overall concepts." "Yeah, the permutations and the groove variations." "Well, what do you mean by the concepts?" I said, "Well, there are a couple of overriding concepts. Do you know the concepts?" He said, "No, but I can play the patterns." I said, "You know what?
Give me the book."
I said,
This isn't a test, is it?
I said,
Am I getting graded here?
Yes, you are.
When's the drop date?
Fail anyway. So I said, "Well, you kind of wasted your summer, because you have the illusion when you put the book up that you can play those things. But if you can't demonstrate those concepts, you really didn't learn anything." That's retrieval. That's the ability to recall a concept, a style, a feel, a pattern, something that you've chunked together procedurally through your memory. I know we're kind of jumping ahead with terms, but it's retrieval. It's this fits in this spot, which is completely the opposite of I learned a lick, let me just stuff it in here.
Right.
That's not what that is.
We're not talking about memorization. Like, you didn't do a good job of memorizing the patterns in the book. Otherwise, you could play it without the book.
That's right.
That's not what we're talking about.
No, we're not talking about memorizing the patterns. And if I've been playing out of that book, I don't know, 15, 20, however old the book is. And if you said, "Can you play one of the patterns?" No. Can you create a pattern demonstrating those basic concepts?
Right.
Absolutely.
Yep. So,
but it would be my pattern, not Dave Garibaldi's pattern. It would be my pattern, which is elaboration.
So how do you develop this retrieval method? Because it's not just a matter of playing it enough times to where you just have it.
Right.
It's you go through steps of applying it to music, applying variations, applying. So walk us through some of that.
I'll give you the 5-step method that I use. And by next year, it may be 6 steps, it may be 4 steps, but right now it's 5 steps. And the first thing is the thing. We're just going to call it the thing because it's a pretty fancy university term, the thing. The thing could be, let's say it's a sticking, and let's say it's a paradiddle. Okay. So student A gets a pad, puts a metronome on, and plays paradiddles in 16ths at whatever tempo. Student B says, "Okay, I can play a paradiddle. I want to change up the accents." All paradiddles, I'm just switching the accents. All of a sudden, I'm making it more mine.
Right, right.
Which is going to help in my memory. That's step one. Step two is let me make something out. Let me go to the drums and not just sit at the pad, because that's actually what I'm going to play professionally.
Yeah.
Nobody ever said, "Hey, Mark, no, you don't. Small kid, big kid. No, just bring the pad." No.
Actually, they tell me that all the time. That's the only place I play. A soft pad at that, in a loud room.
You got brushes on that pad?
Yeah.
So you go to the drums, and whether it's, you're moving the stickings around the drum, but it's basically a paradiddle, and you incorporate the feet. Oh, what if I play the R's with the right foot, and I play quarter notes over here? Oh, that's cool. What if I do it the other way? What if I play all the R's with the feet and I alternate the L's with both hands? Okay, now I'm starting to create
I have a book. I'm going to write a book. A permutation of every paradiddle ever made around the drum
Yeah,
set.
and you know what? I guarantee you either somebody has done it or is doing it, and then what's going to happen is somebody will be able to play that book. And then when you say, "Can you sit down at the drums and show me what you learned?" There won't be anything.
Right.
Can you get the book out?
Yeah.
So now you're...
But is that the experimentation is what makes it intrinsic. It brings it into you as a person or a drummer.
That's the exact right term. It makes it yours.
Yeah.
Steve Gadd doesn't sound like Smitty Smith. They don't sound like Keith Moon sound. Those drummers all had their own, the great drummers all have their own sound because they moved away from, I can play this faster or longer or whatever. It's how they developed their sound. And it's that curiosity thing we were talking about before.
Right.
So, yeah, step two is now, okay. Step three is now let me basically contextualize it and make a pattern or a fill from it. Okay? So you play maybe, 3 measures of whatever, straight A. Okay?
Yep.
Or let me make a groove from it. Okay.
Yep.
Now, that's mine. That's not example 13 on page 12. It's mine.
Yeah.
Step 4 is...
And still taking the concept. I mean, you're not going outside of the thing.
It's the thing.
Okay, cool.
So, and I heard a phrase long ago, and the phrase is, let the limitations free you. In other words, instead of just improvising, if somebody said, "Mark, sit down and just improvise," it's like, well, okay. Mark, take a paradiddle and show me something. Oh, I can do that.
Right.
Do you want it in a triplet field? Do you want it in 6? We can do that.
Yeah.
Everything that we do musically is within limitations. There's a tempo, there's a style, there's a feel.
Yep.
That's how we should practice.
And that's why the first page of the Stone Book talk about limitations.
And that's all you... Well, I mean, we all play the whole book. It's amazing. But it's stickings. Stickings are one of our best friends.
Yeah.
So now we're creating this thing that's ours. So retrieval is going to be easier because it's not Stone's or somebody else's. It's ours.
Yeah.
Step 4, I couldn't come up with a better term, so I just called it super contextualization, which means...
Super...
contextualization.
I'm going to remember that.
Which is just like uber contextualization, which means, okay, so now you have this. Okay. Put the music on.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
Because
which is a key element to practice, right?
It's music. I want to have my practice as closely associated with what I'm doing, playing.
Right.
So I don't have a metronome on when I play. Doesn't mean I shouldn't practice with one, but what I do have is a bass player in a song with a form, right? That I need to follow the form. So if I'm going to play a fill, it's not every 4 measures. It's where does the music tell me to play a fill? Well, when the singer's not singing or when the horn players don't have a line, so I'm playing over top of them, put music on. And if you're going to play that fill, play it into music. And you'll hear whether you come in, you're rushing over, and then you record it and play it back.
Okay.
The fifth element, of course, all along you've been doing this, and the neurological term is elaboration, which for us is improvisation, or what I call what if.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're doing this, okay, what might be the next step that I can take that to? Okay, what if I played paradiddles and had a fifth stroke that was with one of my feet? So my hands are still playing, but there's a fifth stroke with a foot, and then I play a left power. Oh, so you're talking about 16th notes and groupings of 5. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So how might that sound? All right, I'll play it with left hand lead. Okay.
Then you're coming up with all kinds of combinations, and then you need to write a book.
They need to write a book. I'm
But
not saying that you need to.
Right.
Oh, well, where are you going to play that, Mark? I may not play it. The idea is that I'm taking something which was an inanimate,
Right. Paradiddle.
and I'm making it mine, and I'm using my brain to create something new. Because when I'm, especially jazz, but with almost every time you sit down, you're improvising.
Yep.
I need to make something out of singles, doubles, somewhere.
Yep.
So I need to always be engaged and focused. If you don't practice improvising, what makes you think you're going to be able to improvise when the time comes?
Oh, I thought you just learned the licks,
Oh.
and then you pulled the licks out of your bag of licks.
Yeah, you know what? It's about authenticity. It's
Right.
It's about being true to who you are, and not doing anything to compete with another drummer or impress anybody. It's about musicality. So I like those
back
5
Back
steps.
up one more thing.
Uh-oh.
You just said it.
Okay.
You're doing what you do to not impress
Right.
other drummers. And
Oh
not,
yeah. Almost every drummer has some degree of that when they play, because when you practice a pattern, how long do you practice that pattern for? 4 minutes, 6 minutes, 20 seconds? Then you move on to the next pattern. We're ADD. We play drum fills when we're practicing every 4 measures. We're shifting all the time. We don't do ding 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 for 9 minutes in a row. We don't. That's how we play, but we practice. And you talk about overplaying, okay? Why do you think so many drummers overplay? Because that's how they practice. They practice in an environment where they're ding ding and now, oh, let me check this out. And that's a mental representation of what it's supposed to sound like. That's a neural pathway.
Right.
Because I'm not practicing with bass. I'm not practicing with a sax player that's going to turn around and curse at me. So when I go to sit down with other musicians, I just can't. I remember saying to somebody, it's like a kid, like a little kid who's not been socialized, who by the time they're 6 years old, they've not been allowed out of the house to play with other kids. What do you think that first experience is going to be like?
Yep.
This is mine. That's not yours. Get away from me. When you practice 8 hours a day by yourself in a room playing stuff, how do you think you're going to play? You're going to play like you have ADD. Even if you don't, that's how it sounds. You just can't stop doing it because that's the only way you know.
But this goes back to how you were talking about practice with music.
Yeah.
Because if you take your paradiddle fill or your paradiddle, permutation or
Mhm.
however you're making a fill out of it, and you're putting it with James Brown,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to play that fill differently than if you played it with Van Halen.
Yeah.
And that's going
Exactly.
to completely change everything about what you just learned or what you just did.
Yeah. The musical sense is arrived at through listening.
Yep.
So what you just gave is a perfect example. You know the difference between what you might do in the James Brown tune versus the Van Halen tune.
Yep.
By listening. Not everybody knows that difference. So the key is to listen. You can play that paradiddle as a groove. And somebody may say, Oh, I didn't know you were playing paradiddles. Well, I'm not. Well, of course.
Right.
It's just a sticking variation that I'm adapting the accents and the balance to the musical situation.
Right. And this is the kind of the point is, I've heard it said before. Well, you can't apply all, like the paradiddle in every situation.
No,
but really,
you know what?
it's
See, it gets back to what we were talking about with practicing contextually. And outside of physically practicing contextually the music, you have to listen.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, one of the greatest inventions technologically for drummers and musicians is the scan button or the automatic scan, or the fact that I can change stations from my steering wheel.
Yeah.
Because I listen to everything. I have 3 country stations, 3 metal stations, rock, 80s. I have Sinatra, 3 jazz. I have musical. I have everything on there because, okay. And it's not music necessarily that I like to listen to. It's, I hear that language.
Mm-hmm.
I hear how that sounds different than this. And that's contextualization. So even before you get to physically try to adapt that to James Brown and Van Halen, you have to orally know what the difference is.
So there you have how to practice. And we didn't cover effortful. What does that mean?
Effortful is don't be distracted while you practice.
Yep.
If you practice, and I tell students, sometimes students say to me, man, I practice, 8 to 10 o'clock every night. I said, why? Well, it's the time I have. I said, okay. What if you practiced from 12 to 1? Do you ever have time from 12 to 1? Yeah. Why don't you practice then? Where do you practice? Well, I always practice in 604. Why? Because that's an environment you're learning in. Why don't you practice up on the 7th floor? What do you practice? Since you're going to be playing in different situations, different styles, you should practice in different times, different locations. You should vary everything that you practice. And the more improvisational your music is, like jazz, you need to vary your practice. Because you never know exactly what you're going to walk into. When we just did a gig, played a concert Sunday night in Toronto, I have the advantage of doing a sound check in the afternoon, so I can decondition myself. I know these are called performance modulators. I know what the room looks like. I know what it sounds like. I know what the drums set up. I know what it feels like. I know where the bass player is. I know where everything is. So when I come to play at night, there are no new experiences. Mm-hmm. So I'm already preconditioned to what it's going to sound and feel and look like. So I'm not distracted. So if you can practice in different environments where you're not distracted, it's going to be easier for you to not be distracted when you're playing. I had a student, and he used to know when because I used to come and see him play all the time at university concerts. And he always used to look for me and find where I was in the audience. And a couple times a tune, he would look up at me, and I used to say, what do you think's going through your head when you're looking at me? And what do you think you're not focusing on that you should be focusing on? They're called performance modulators, and you need to kind of get rid of those, or else you're not going to focus. So effortful practice is focused practice. Don't have your iPhone next to you. Don't have the TV on. Don't be holding a conversation. This is where your focus is. That's why I only practice an hour and a half at a time, or an hour at a time.
Yep.
It's hard to concentrate for that long a time.
Yep. How does one work on focus practice?
There are 2 aspects of it. One is and again, I've mentioned this before, but the term I use is contextualized practice. So oftentimes when we practice drum fills, we'll play, let's say it's a 2-beat drum fill, we'll play 1.5 measures of time, then a 2-beat drum fill, or we'll play 3.5 measures of time in a 2-beat drum fill. But that's not how we need to play live. So contextualized practice says however you practice is you're making, again, I'm just going to use this term, it's called a mental representation of I need to play a drum fill every 2 measures or every 4 measures. I heard myself on an early recording, and it was a really fast jazz tune, and I was tending to play a bass drum on one every 4 measures. I didn't notice that until I listened back.
Okay.
That's a mental representation of how I practiced. I practiced in groups of 4 measures. That's how I played. Contextualized practice says, but that's not how music is.
Okay.
So you need to do 2 things. You need to be able to play a groove, simple groove, for 2.5 minutes. With no drum fills, because that's maybe what you're going to have to do in the recording.
Right,
You need to be able to play great time, great feel, the same way you're going to need to be able to play it live. So your practice should mirror what you're trying to do live.
So even when you're playing things that are very simple,
Mm-hmm.
the focus becomes on the nuance, not the difficulty of trying to get through the pattern.
Well,
Is that
that's very true. You're. I'll take it a step past that. What you just said is very accurate. The focus is on the musicality of what you're doing.
Mhm.
These things I've practiced so many times that I'm not. They're not separate things. It's
Right.
one thing. So I don't have to focus on having a conversation with myself. I can now focus more on the bass player, because mechanically, neurologically, I can do this without, let me ghost that 8th note on the bass drum. That's a way that I've learned to do that in that style. If it was a different style, maybe a more compressed style, it would sound a little different.
Sure.
But I've learned how to do that from years of practice. So my focus is on matching what I'm doing with the bass and guitar, singers, horns, whatever it is,
Right.
because these things have become proceduralized. Proceduralized is, you mentioned chunking before. It's a fancy way of saying, like, you see a word. Let's see, I'm seeing names. Music. Okay, well, when you're 6 years old, you're looking at those letters and sounding it out. Okay. Now, you don't have to look at every one of those letters. That music is a picture, and those words in combination is a picture. You don't have to sound it out. You know what it sounds like. So that's chunking. It's a simplistic way of describing chunking, but this is not 3 separate things or 4 separate things. It's a chunk. This is one thing. So I'm talking in one tempo. I'm gesturing in another tempo. That's not going to move. I taught a student a lesson one time. I'm saying, we're talking about the hi-hat. I said, when you first start to rock the hi-hat, because it's a constant motion, and it's not a ballistic motion. A ballistic motion is a stop and start.
Yep.
This is a constant motion. So I said, when you start to learn that, you're thinking about it. As you develop it, it becomes one thing. That whole motion becomes one thing where you don't even have to think about it. I said, here's what you're going to do. Get your phone out and find out what tempo I'm doing this at. Okay? I said, now we're going to go through your lesson, and I'm going to keep doing that, and I'm going to keep talking, and I'm going to demonstrate, and then you're going to play. And it's going to be in the same tempo 30 minutes from now. I didn't practice that with a metronome. You didn't have to.
Yeah.
It's proceduralized. It's a chunk.
It's gotten to that time. Yep.
When I wanted to work on triplet things, let's say double foot thing, right? If you said, can you play the same thing again? I said, I could probably play close to the same thing.
That wasn't it.
Oh, sorry. Those things are chunk. I'm not thinking about individual strokes.
Sure.
It's a chunk. It's one thing.
Yeah.
And because it's a chunk, now I can focus on, when I'm playing, the things I should be listening to and looking at.
Okay. Yep.
I want to listen to the bass player. I want to see how hard he or she are pulling those strings. I want to watch the saxophone. I want to see, because I'm getting information about what's going on around me.
Right.
The modulators that I want to avoid are, well, those people are sitting close to me, or I'm really hungry, or those things. If you practice focused, you'll be able to play focused.
Right.
If you practice with distractions, you'll play with distractions.
Yeah, and we talked about that, having your phone on your music stand.
Yeah.
With the text coming up.
Listen, I'm a big fan of technology. I use technology all the time, and I firmly believe that technology doesn't make us dumber; it makes us smarter. So I'm not anti-tech in any way.
Yep.
I'm about trying to differentiate good practice, more effective practice from less effective practice, and practice should mirror as much as possible performances. So if you practice in a distracted way, or in a play, or in a way where you're playing fills every couple measures, that's the only way your brain knows how to do it. It's going to be hard to be somebody you're not on a 5-minute tune in a session after you've been practicing for the last 3 weeks a completely different way. How do you manage that?
So you can develop it. One of the tools you talk about a lot is recording yourself and listening, because you're probably going to be a lot more focused while the light's beeping on the camera, and knowing that you're going to listen back to it.
That's actually a good point. You get past that like you do in the studio, or like you do live.
Sure.
Sometimes people say, well, do you ever get nervous when you play? And I said, no, because I'm kind of comfortable with what I'm doing. If I don't know what I'm doing, I'm pretty nervous because I don't know what the heck I'm doing. But when you talk about, what was your question again?
So the question about recording yourself as a way of, if you need focus to your practice.
Okay.
Is that a tool?
It is a tool, and I'm going to talk about it in a second. It's called a feedback loop that we want to create and that you can use to teach yourself almost everything for the rest of your life. It's a feedback loop. The first way you're able to measure, and this is, it's called knowledge of results. Knowledge of results is a way to learn. Let's say you have, a kid 5, 6 years old, and you're standing 30 feet from him, and he or she's throwing a ball to you. And they throw the ball, and it ends up being 10 feet short. Knowledge of results says, I know immediately that, this is the kid talking, I know immediately that I need to throw that harder. You don't need to have somebody tell you that, okay?
Right.
The other part is, and you can do that sometimes when you're playing, you know this is not even. You don't even need to, you can hear that it's not even. That's knowledge of results. But you only measure that against what your experience is and how it's supposed to sound. Okay?
Okay. Yep.
But that's immediate. The other reason, or the other tool that you need to use is a feedback loop, which is recording. And it's 3 parts. It's focus, feedback, and fix, the 3 Fs. So focus says, I want to play this groove and have it sound this way, or I want to play this cascara pattern in my right hand with left foot clave, and I want to match that up. So as I'm playing that, practicing, I think that I'm doing it maybe a way that I'm not really doing it, because different parts of my brain are activating the motor skill.
So you're concentrating on making it happen.
Right. And I think it sounds right, but that's the focus.
Yep.
The feedback is I'm recording myself, and then I listen back, and it's, oh, that's not even. Or, wow, the right hand was, I didn't put accents, or I didn't do this, or I thought I was doing it, I didn't. Oh, that's what it sounded like. And then the fix part is, okay, so now let me just work on, instead of just playing with no accents, let's say I'm playing 2-3 clave. Now with accents. Whatever accent pattern I want to put in.
Right.
Now, my knowledge of results, because I've been doing that enough, says I know immediately how this sounds. Mm-hmm. But as I'm learning something, I don't know how it sounds, which is why I record it. Because as I'm listening back, it's with a different way of assessing than when I'm actually playing. So as you get more experience as a drummer, you use knowledge of results, but we all use feedback from recordings. Watching even a picture of how I might be sitting, my posture, my balance, how I might have been stretching too far for this, or playing something that didn't come out. Why did that happen? Then I need to fix it. So it's feedback, which could come first. Feedback comes first when somebody says, Mark, this thing you were doing, this didn't sound even, or this was whatever. Oh,
right.
That's my feedback. Now I'm going to work on that.
Yep.
Then I'm going to employ another level of feedback, which is a recording or video. Then I'm going to listen back, and I've either corrected it or I haven't corrected it. The advantage of using a feedback loop every single day is I have some students, and I'm not a big fan of weekly lessons. I don't know that you need a lesson every week. It could be every 2 weeks, depending on your level and what you're working on. But if I assign something to a student to work on, and let's say I don't see them for another 7 days, is the only time that they're learning for that 1 hour, and for the other 6 days and 23 hours they're not learning? They're just repeating what I told them?
Practicing what you told them to practice.
So they're only actually learning 1 hour a week, where the feedback loop says, okay, now this is how you're playing it. This is how I'd like you to play it. And I record, give me your phone, I record that in 60 seconds. Now they take that home, and the next day they're practicing it, and they record it, and they listen to themselves playing, and then to me playing, and they say, it aligns, it doesn't align. Oh, let me fix this.
Yep.
And now they've had a whole week of actually developing and getting better at that. So, because if they don't do this feedback loop, they're going to come back in the next week, and I'm going to say, no. You need to work on this. And then they will have lost 6 days of learning.
Right.
Because they haven't employed.
Which is why a lot of people have weekly lessons, is because the feedback loop doesn't happen until the next lesson.
Right. And I'm a fan of not really saying, okay, next week play, page 23 and 24 out of a book, because to me that's not really substantive learning of the principles. You talk about concepts, and then you can say, for example, listen to these recordings, or try this, or do this. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the advantage of weekly lessons is nobody can go longer than a week without developing a bad habit. Mm-hmm. And you talk about bad habits, and bad habits, the way that the neural pathways work, once you develop a bad habit, you don't really unlearn that. You just have to develop a better habit. It's like the new habit doesn't go on top of the old neural pathways that are bad. That's still there. So if you've been doing that for a week, you've been practicing it a few hours a day, that's starting to get ingrained. Picture a big field of overgrown weeds and grass 3 feet tall, right? And you walk up and down this path of 100 yards for 2 hours every day. After a week, there's going to be a path.
Right.
Well, maybe the end of that path leads you to a cliff, so maybe that wasn't a good habit to use. So now you want to start a different path, but that old path is still there. And your brain still wants to go back to this, which is why when you practice, you really need to focus.
Yep.
Because it's easy to slip back into this bad habit, because it's a more deeply ingrained neural pathway.
And that's the importance of getting out of the comfort zone, because you generally, we talked about that before, but generally you reinforce the things that you have done in the past, and you reinforce, maybe without even trying to, bad habits or...
Exactly, and that's why you record yourself. Or that's why, you take a lesson with Marc Wessels and say, I think I'm doing this. Can you tell me what I'm, or just, hey man, listen to me play and just give me some feedback.
Yeah. So starting at the baseline of what you have to do is to be open and acceptance of feedback.
Yeah.
Even from yourself.
Yeah.
Because, sometimes I think that students that I've had that do not improve, it's because they don't necessarily want to hear it, or they don't want to analyze their faults. They just want to get better.
Right.
Does that make sense? Like, how do you get better without knowing
Oh, and
your
listen,
faults?
I've been meaning to tell you that's like a very uncool shirt. I don't know where you got that.
I know. You want some?
No. No, that's an example of criticism. People don't like criticism at any level. And if you're new at something or not completely secure, it's hard to hear. Or if you have a big ego, it's hard for anybody to take criticism. Mm-hmm. That's what feedback is. It's hard for me to listen to myself play. There's a jazz station in Philly that they play a couple of recordings that I'm on. I turn them off because it was like 15 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever. And it's like, or at least I'll say, oh, there's that section coming up.
Turn it off.
Okay, now I'm good.
Yeah.
It's like, it's hard to be reminded of those things that we don't do well, whether it's a teacher telling us, you don't do this well, or me sitting in a practice room after playing 40-some years and trying to work on something that it sounds like I'm a beginner at this thing. It's being in the comfort zone. That's why the word is comfort.
Yep.
It's easy for us. Being in the learning zone is frustrating. It's challenging. It stretches us just enough. Because the next zone that we want to stay out of is the panic zone. The panic zone is the first time you hear, let's say, Keith Carlock or Dennis Chambers, or the Steve Gadd play, and it's like, I'm going to try to do that. And it's like, oh my God, I'll never be that good. I'll never be able to do that.
Right.
And it's frustrating for students. It's frustrating for professionals. It's frustrating when people are trying to learn something new because they're being shown or they're listening to something at another level that they're not, either they don't understand, they're not ready for. Stay out of the panic zone. Stay mostly in the learning zone, and to some degree reinforce your confidence, because we all need that, and it's a good motivator for us in the comfort zone. But only 1/4 of your practice should be in the comfort zone. 3/4 should be in the learning zone.
So you need to go to the website, because you do have a chart on the website that shows you those steps of practice, of how you can break down a practice session, and how you can detail, well, if I'm doing technique, I'm doing this, and fill it in on your own. So talk about that chart just for a second.
The chart is pretty cool. The chart is something that I developed over the years based on the research of elaboration, or based on neurological research that talks about elaboration and interleaving, which is mixing things up. And so there are 6 categories. It's movement, technique, styles, musicality, improvisation, and other. So, and let me just say this overall. I don't have any of the answers. I'm just on a path of research to try to use what brilliant neuroscientists and psychologists have learned and transfer that to drums. This research is exploding so quickly. In another 3 years, it's going to be not disproving what we know now, but there's going to be other levels to this. So I'm on this pathway. So I have students, and sometimes people will say, well, I don't agree with you. I don't think that's true. And I say, anybody can have any opinion about anything, but if you say I'm wrong, I want you to prove me wrong, because if you can prove me wrong, then I've learned something. So, and my practice grid is an example of that, where I have technique was my first block. And a student said, it was a guitar major, was a grad student, and he wrote a paper. We had a long discussion about this. He wrote a paper on mechanism. I said, what is that? I said, isn't that technique? He said, no, it's different. Technique might be scales. For us, it might be rudiments, it might be stickings, it might be hand-foot patterns, it might be whatever. Movement is how your body is moving, how you're holding the stick. Or are you holding it a little more on the back end, the angle, the technique that you use, the movement physiological, muscular, neurological. It's not drums. It's how does the lever work? It's all of that. Technique, now we're starting to move into drums. But that was a result of a guitar student saying, oh, I separate. I don't think of technique like that. Technique is something different than mechanism and movement. So it's like, oh, I'm going to add that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So the practice grid, you can take one of these columns out. You can add another column. It's very flexible. The basic premise is write down what you're going to practice based on your goals. If you're a high school drummer, somebody says, well, we're going to play Neil Hefti chart, because I just did a clinic with a band a couple of weeks ago, and they did Lil Darlin', one of the hardest charts at any level. Greg Field talked about playing with bass. He said it's the hardest chart he played. Very slow, smooth with brushes, very soft, no big ones. It's very hard to play. If you know you're going to have to play that, what do you need to work on? You need to work on brush technique at whatever it is, 80 beats a minute, 70 beats a minute.
60.
60 beats a minute.
50.
40, slow, smooth, mostly quarter notes, not jazz time, softer hi-hat, no bass drum, no fills. That's contextualized practice. So I'm going to practice that for 15 minutes, that tempo. I mean, the chart's like 6 or 7 minutes, so you need to at least practice for that long.
Right.
What else am I going to need to practice? Okay, I'm going to need to practice brushes. I'm going to need to practice contextually, because I want to hear musically, is there a bass drum on one? What else is going on musically in that piece that I need to pay attention to? What else should I do? In my other category, I usually define that as things where you don't have the sticks in your hands. Focus listening. Mm-hmm. Let me listen to the smoothness of how the horns are playing. Let me try to mirror that with my concept. So my practice has very specific goals. If I want to practice brushes, okay, is it bossa nova, like Peter Erskine sweep? Is it him, Steve Smith, amazing brush player? Is it Jeff Hamilton? Let me look at some of the different things that they do, but it has to be specific, not just practice brushes. So each one of those blocks, I put something in that I want to practice. I go across from musicality, technique, improvisation, go to the next column, take a break, come back tomorrow. Next thing, get down to the end, come back to the beginning. And 3/4 of these things should be developmental. 1/4 should be comfort. And then after a couple weeks, I'm checking my progress. And if this is starting to feel pretty good, maybe I only practice it for half a segment. Or maybe, okay, that's enough of that for now. Here's something else. Now I need to work on a bossa nova that I'm going to play drums with an orchestra, with my school orchestra.
So you can move outside of the thing.
Move in and out. It's completely flexible. Right. And as I hear things, they go on my list. Oh, I heard Dennis Chambers do this thing. Yeah, that's something I would like to practice. So that goes on a list of long things that I want to work on. Maybe it's not the priority list, because I don't have a concert coming up where I need to do that, but it's somewhere on the list of something that I want to learn.
So keeping that diary and that before you go into your practice room, having a roadmap of what you're going to be doing is incredibly important. Versus
deliberate practice.
Yeah.
It's not let me get in here and play.
Yeah.
Right. I firmly believe that if you practice correctly, you can practice for 2 hours a day, and the progress that you will make after just a few years will shock you. We've all heard students, and sometimes, unfortunately, a student will audition at the university, and I'll hear them play, and I'm looking at their resume or bio or history, and they say, well, they've been playing for 8 years. And I look at them, and it's like, have you been taking lessons? Yeah. For how long? For 8 years. And it's like, And I feel bad because they have not developed. Do you practice every day? Every day. And you just want to say you should get your money back.
Right, right.
Because you're not developing
has no
the way you
bearing
should.
On how long you play, how much you practice. So there is no real 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
Blanket statement.
Yeah.
If I practice for 10,000 hours, I'm going to be a great drummer.
You can practice for 10,000 hours and you'll be a great practicer. But and I tell students that
you won't have a life.
I said, "Is your goal? You're a great practicer, Mark. I practice this. I don't know what that means, but okay, you're getting great at doing that. But it's not about playing the drums in a musical setting. Yeah. 10,000 hours. Some people can practice some things for much, much less because they have the curiosity. They ask the right questions. They always go to what if. They always go to improvisation. They always go to try to make it their own. They don't follow necessarily in any individual's path. They make their own path. Well, it doesn't take them 10,000 hours. Other people, you could practice 8 hours a day, and you say, I had a student, and I said, maybe in the second year, and I said, okay, I know you're telling me you're practicing 5 hours a day. From now on, you need, which is a good idea anyway, keep a log. Every minute you practice, I want you to write down when you started to practice, when you finished, and exactly how long you practiced and what you practiced. Because I don't know what you're practicing.
Yep.
And this was a student who we completely changed the way he practiced. And right now, I'm not going to embarrass him, but he's an amazing player, and he's on tour. If I mention the name, everybody say, "Oh, really? Yeah, he's pretty amazing." It's about practice.
Right.
It's about practicing the right things the right way. 2 hours a day. If you do it right, you're good. If you want to practice 3 hours a day, you're not necessarily going to be 50% better. You want to practice 3 hours a day? That's fine. Practice 3 hours a day. 8 hours a day, you don't need to do what I did.
Right. It's about what you get done in the amount of time that and how focused.
Deliberate practice. Anders Ericsson, who developed that theory of 10,000 hours, is the first one to tell you it's not about 10,000 hours. Other people have misinterpreted it as being this is an absolute rule. It needs to be. It's not about. And Anders, who developed it, that's what he's done for 30 years as a researcher, a psychologist. He's the first one to say it's not 10,000 hours. People have misinterpreted that. It's about deliberate practice, focused, deliberate practice with these elements: elaboration, interleaving, taking breaks. It's about, because this is how your brain works. So I've taken those neuroscience, neurophysiological, cognitive psychology, and I've interpreted it for drums.
Right.
And when I show these people that, they say, "Yeah, this is good."
Yeah.
I don't know anything about drums, but it looks good.
Well, I think on the next time we get together, we're going to talk about how you can practice away from the drums and still get better.
It's pretty amazing that
Next time. Let's wait.
No, here's what I'll say though. Like every time we do one of these, like every week I come back and I'm wearing the same clothes.
How's this possible?
It's cool.
I
only have one set of clothes.
To get a new wardrobe.
This is it.
This is a point I think that we open it up a little bit for questions. If you've got questions that either you heard from the podcast and you really want to ask, you want to get inside the mind of Marc Dicciani, which I don't recommend, but if you want to ask something, if you'll write to us, if you'll email us at the link on the podcast description, I'm assuming that's how it works.
Yeah.
I'm going to get with Marc and I'm going to ask him your question, and then we'll tag it onto our broadcast. So
cool.
Please, you got better questions than I do, so please send them in.
I don't have all the answers. And if you really stump me, it'll be really cool because that'll open up a whole new area of research for me. So ask away.